When you're not raised in an emotionally healthy environment where you see healthy emotions modeled by your parents and you see healthy empathy modeled towards you and experienced towards you, how the heck are you supposed to give people something that you never learned because you never got it? Now, that's not an excuse. You're all grown-up men, right? But I'm giving you some perspective, and don't go tell your wife, well, Kristen said that I don't have this because I didn't get it from my childhood. You're a man. That's why you're in MIB. Do you guys get empathy from each other? Do you get validation from each other in MIB? You have to start learning how to receive it from each other. Learn to notice what happens in you when another man shows you empathy. Do you have resistance toward it? Listen to your self-talk. Okay, so because when you start to feel accepted and loved by somebody else, even if they might not think what you're saying makes sense, is when you can start to really realize how incredibly powerful and healing it is to get empathy. So there's one big piece. Another big piece of why it's so difficult to show empathy to your wife is because the very unwanted sexual behavior that you started as a preteen or a child or a teenager, most likely. I have never met a guy who started like after his teenage years. That's the first time he started unwanted sexual behavior. So I'm kind of making an assumption. Perhaps somebody's story is different. I'd love to hear that sometime. Correct me if I'm wrong. However, in those formative years, when you started using pornography or fantasy and masturbation and unwanted sexual behavior to numb the pain and to fill the emptiness and to soothe the sense of inadequacy, etc., that sexual behavior actually impedes the section of the brain that is responsible for empathy. So just like a muscle that you've never exercised before, it's going to feel weird. It might feel awkward. You're going to have to work it out. You're going to have to practice it and use it, or you will lose it. Even if it's weird and awkward, we use a formula for talking. When Michael and I started working on marriage counseling, which was before we got engaged, PS, because this was a second marriage for both of us. We had both experienced betrayal in a first marriage and were terrified to get married again and be hurt. And so we started this work. We had to use a literal formula on paper to show that we were hearing each other. So don't feel like you should just magically know how to show empathy. In your MIB materials, there is a little section of a video from Carol the coach with a formula called AVR. And so that is a resource you can use, basically a formula for how to show empathy. And you may think that if you can't do it right or perfect right away, why bother? That's just not true. Be vulnerable with your wife and let her know, like, hey, I'm realizing like, I don't know how to do this. That is actually extremely attractive to your wife. When you're vulnerable, when you admit like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I really want to try. That is honest and it is vulnerable. And let her know like, hey, this is where you can quote me. Hey, Kristen suggested that I start using this formula to practice this, and that like a muscle over time, it will get stronger. Your brain will build neural pathways to actually, instead of just using a formula to communicate empathy to your wife, that you will actually start to build it.